The night the city decided to test its own conscience began quietly, with rain slipping down glass towers and pooling in broken streets, as if even the sky could not decide where it belonged. In one part of the city, light spilled endlessly from penthouses, warm and careless. In another, shadows swallowed doorways where people slept sitting up, guarding what little life had left them. It was on a night like this that wealth and vulnerability finally crossed paths, not in a boardroom or a charity gala, but on a wet pavement where pride had already been stripped away, and survival had become a daily negotiation. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the idea that one moment can change an entire life, take a second right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that may be quietly breaking. Ethan Hale had everything that could be counted. Money moved around him like air, unseen but always present. His name sat comfortably on buildings, on awards, on glossy magazine covers that praised his discipline and ambition. From the outside, his life looked complete, sealed, and untouchable. Yet inside, it felt oddly unfinished, like a house built quickly with rooms no one ever lived in. He had learned early that success silenced fear, and so he kept succeeding, stacking achievements higher and higher, hoping one day they would block out the echo he carried with him. But echoes are stubborn things. They wait. On the other side of the city lived, or rather survived, Maya. She had not always known hunger as an intimate companion. There was a time when her days were measured in routines, morning buses, shared meals, small dreams spoken out loud. That life disappeared quietly, the way important things often do, without ceremony or warning. A medical emergency drained savings. A job loss followed. Support systems thinned out as exhaustion grew heavy. Eventually, vulnerability stopped being a temporary condition and became a permanent label society placed on her without asking. She learned how quickly people look past you when you no longer represent possibility. Only need. Maya's days were built from fragments. A safe corner to rest, a cup of water, a brief kindness from a stranger that lingered longer than it should have. Nights were harder. They pressed in, filled with memories she tried not to touch. She carried her dignity carefully, like a fragile object she could not afford to lose. Vulnerability did not mean weakness, but it demanded constant strength. Strength no one applauded, strength no one paid for. Ethan did not usually walk. His life was scheduled down to minutes, insulated by cars, assistants, and glass. But that night, a delayed meeting and an uncharacteristic impulse led him onto the street. The rain forced him to slow down, to notice things he usually passed at speed. Faces blurred past him, but one figure remained still. Maya sat under a flickering streetlight, soaked, unmoving, as if the world had already decided she was invisible. At first, Ethan felt the familiar discomfort that came with seeing suffering too closely. It threatened the carefully managed distance he kept between himself and anything that could not be solved with money. He almost walked past. Almost. But something about the stillness stopped him. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was the quiet resignation that comes when someone has already asked for help too many times and learned not to expect an answer. Maya noticed him noticing her, and in that brief exchange of awareness, something shifted. She did not reach out or plead. She simply existed, and that was somehow harder to ignore. Ethan realized, with a sudden heaviness, that he had spent years talking about impact without ever standing in its presence. The wealth he commanded felt abstract in that moment, almost useless, like numbers written on water. What followed was not a heroic gesture or a cinematic rescue. It was small, human, imperfect. Ethan sat down nearby, not to fix, but to understand, and for the first time in a long while, he listened without planning his next move. Maya spoke of loss not as tragedy, but as fact, of how quickly the ground can disappear beneath your feet, of how society measures worth and productivity and forgets the rest. Her vulnerability was not offered for pity, but for truth. In listening, Ethan confronted something he had avoided his entire life, the reality that success does not make one immune to emptiness, and failure does not erase one's humanity. He saw in Maya a reflection of his own fragility, one he had buried under ambition. The divide between them suddenly felt thinner, less defined by money and more by circumstance. Change rarely arrives as a single dramatic moment. It comes in layers. Ethan did not leave that night with a plan to save anyone. He left with a discomfort he could not shake. Over the following days he returned, sometimes with food, sometimes with resources, sometimes just with presence. Maya resisted at first, wary of promises that fade. But consistency is persuasive. Slowly, trust formed, not as dependency but as partnership. Maya's challenges did not vanish because someone wealthy noticed her. Systems still moved slowly. Trauma did not dissolve overnight. There were setbacks that tested both of them. But something essential had shifted. She was no longer unseen. And Ethan for the first time felt grounded in something real. His wealth, once a wall, became a bridge, but only because vulnerability had shown him where to place it. As weeks turned into months, Maya began to rebuild step by fragile step. Access to medical care restored her strength. Training programs reignited skills she thought were lost. Most importantly, dignity returned, not as charity but as choice. Ethan, too, changed in ways he did not expect. He redirected resources not toward recognition, but toward sustainable change. He learned that generosity without humility can wound, but generosity paired with respect can heal. The city remained the same on the surface. Lights still glowed unevenly. Inequality still existed. But in one small corner of it, 2 lives had been permanently altered. Wealth had met vulnerability, and instead of overpowering it, had learned to kneel beside it. Maya eventually stood on her own again, not as a symbol but as a person with agency and voice. She carried her past with her, not as shame but as knowledge. Ethan carried forward a quieter kind of success, one that did not announce itself but echoed deeply within him. He understood now that the true measure of wealth is not what you accumulate, but what you are willing to share without controlling. Just before the ending, I want to ask you something important. Please take a moment to comment below what this story made you feel. Your words matter, and they might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Near the end of our story, as the rain finally stopped and the streets dried, the city breathed on, unaware of the transformation it had hosted. But transformation does not require permission. It only requires recognition. When wealth meets vulnerability with compassion instead of distance, something rare happens. Both are changed. One gains support. The other gains meaning. If this story touched your heart, if it made you reflect on kindness, empathy, or the quiet power of showing up for someone, please like this video, share it, and engage with the channel. Your interaction keeps these stories alive and reaching those who need them most.